it's going to be up to us to choose which path do we take. And that's easier when you have the Constitution as your gospel of freedom. That's what that is. That's a gospel of freedom. It's the sacred American scripture that tells us how to navigate. Senator Coburn has written a book, Smashing the D.C. Monopoly. The subtitle tells you everything you know. Using Article 5 to restore freedom and to stop a runaway government. Welcome to Dr. Tom Coburn, former U.S. Senator. Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm fine, Glenn. I hope you are as well.
I certainly am. I found your book fascinating, and let me take you to a couple of places. I'm not going to start at the beginning of the book. I want to go to I want to take you to William Barton. Tell the story of William Barton.
Yeah, well, Barton. Actually, there were three people involved in this. One was Colonel George Mason, who actually raised the first issue associated with ever knowing, was there ever a country that voluntarily ceded power back to its citizens, and whether or not they did or did not. And so that started the conversation with Barton and bringing forth Article 5, the subsection that we talk about. There's a lot of stories about Barton in the history, but his leadership in terms of this issue and restoring our freedom.
Well, he said, you wrote in the book, he said, this clause ought to be written in letters of gold. We ought to observe the excellencies of the Constitution. There is a fair opportunity furnished for amendments provided by the states, but this clause should be written in letters of gold.
Well, that's right. And the reason that clause is there is because right now where we find ourselves is that's the only solution that's big enough for the problem in front.
So would you agree with me that the chaos that we are feeling right now, because I think we're having a crisis of chaos. I think that the only time that people reach out for somebody who will make it stop, more of an authoritarian, progressive kind of player, is when they are afraid. And I don't think they're afraid of ISIS or war as much as they are afraid of the loss of the Western way of life. And I think,
Glenn,
go ahead.
I think our country's unsettled. And innately, people know something's wrong.
And would you agree that what's wrong, these problems are coming from the fact that we have not adhered to the Constitution, so we're rudderless?
Well, we not only have not adhered to it, we've had Supreme Court that has changed its meaning irreverently, in my opinion, to where we no longer have the structure that would allow us to maintain the freedoms and the opportunity to fix ourselves, to set ourselves right. You know, what we're seeing today is people talking about the problems we have. A recent poll, I think, said 84% of Americans don't trust the federal government. Well, rightly so. Why would you? There's $1 million in debt per family out there, right? So how do they pay that off? For the millennials, there's $1.7 million just in unfunded liabilities coming their way, not counting the debt.
I will tell you, though, Tom, I don't think that's a bad number, that 84% of people distrust the government. I think you go back to George Washington's time. I'll bet you that number was in the 90s if they would have taken polls. George Washington said you shouldn't trust government. Treat it as fire.
Well, but they're also saying is we don't think it works anymore. Matter of fact, the millennials don't know how it's supposed to work because the education's been so disruptive in not teaching and undermining the principles of our country that we're built upon. I don't worry that people don't trust the federal government. I worry the fact that what that will lead to is no confidence in anything that comes out of there.
Well, you have a problem now where 49% of conservative millennials, 49% believe in freedom of speech, but that the government should determine what that speech should be.
Yeah, and that's scary because we've had our whole education establishment stolen in terms of freedom and the principles that built this country, and the Judeo-Christian principles that allowed us to do that in the first place. So that's all been stolen, and so we've had mind bending. Not that there are not a lot of great young people out there, but when they've been taught that it's not good for you to listen to a difference of opinion. Matter of fact, you ought to not listen to a difference of opinion. Well, the only way you really grow intellectually is to listen to a difference of opinion and actually think about it. And now we have this whole generation that doesn't think you want to, they want to go, my hair's on fire, I can't listen to you, even though you may have sound reasoning and good logic in your discussions. That's a symptom, though, Glenn, of the problem. The problem is we've abandoned limited government, we've undermined personal responsibility, and we're suffering the consequences of it.
You write in the book about Samuel Jones why Article 5 solution, why it exists. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Well, the Article 5 solution exists because it was forced to exist. Matter of fact, it was the only thing in the Constitutional Convention that never had heavy debate. Now, most people don't realize that. If you look at Madison's notes, he did copious notes on the whole convention. And the only aspect of that convention that didn't have vigorous debate, vigorous, hard fighting debate before they came to agreement, was Article 5. And the very aspect that they would come around to allowing a restoration of the principles. Actually, the history is that our founders knew that republics wouldn't live long, right? They knew it wasn't going to live long. And so they came around to the idea that we have to put a way for us to at least put a salvage echo in there.
Tom, I sure appreciate your taking on this topic and explaining it to the American people. Smashing the D.C. monopoly, using Article 5 to restore freedom and stop a runaway government. It's available in bookstores everywhere. It has tremendous history, including a story about Jefferson Davis. After the war, Jefferson Davis said we should have just used Article 5. It led to too much bloodshed. If we would have used Article 5, we wouldn't have had the Civil War.
They almost did, Glenn. They almost did.
Yeah. Smashing the D.C. monopoly, and if you can get involved in the Article 5 movement in your state, it's just passed in Texas, and it is starting to gain momentum, and it is critical. They'll never give themselves a limit on their power in Congress. Never. You need to do it, and it needs to happen through a convention of states to change the Constitution and put a few things in there like, I don't know, you spend the money that you have, not our children's money. Article 5 Convention, and the name of the book, again, is Smashing the D.C. Monopoly by Tom Coburn.
The question facing us and facing our fellow countrymen is a two-word question. Very simply, who decides? The American founders had a simple answer. We, the people, decide.